Hey, just a quick first note before we get this podcast going. I would just like to apologize for the lack of a podcast last week. Um, Life just got a little bit busier. I was a little forgetful, a little bit lazy, but that happens. Okay. But we have them again this week, and hopefully I'll try not to miss another one. So, yes, sorry for that, and enjoy. Ladies and gentlemen, and boys and girls, back to the T.O.A podcast. I am your host, Onvermel, as usual, and today I got a little treat for you. I got something a little bit different. I am joined by one of my brothers. However, this is not Ek. This is not Zakta. You have heard of him. This is How One. How One, would you like to say hi to everybody?
How?
An appropriate response. Before we get directly into the subject of today, I would just like to say How One is our oldest brother and is in a lot of ways responsible for most of the Lego fanatic Lego craze in the family. Not completely. You were not the first one with Lego, but you definitely I would say hyped it up for everybody.
Yes, our second oldest brother would probably dispute quite loudly the possibility that I am responsible for Lego. At most, he might give me 49% of the responsibility.
Yes, yes. So, you actually do have your own podcast as well with our other brother, which I will refer to as the Lost Toa.
Yes, we've been in a spirit of nostalgia. We've been reviewing the Lego Mania magazines of our childhood and using that as a launching point to talk about different Lego themes as we've encountered them throughout the magazine. So it's a trip into like mid late '90s and eventually maybe early 2000s nostalgia.
See, because you guys have already discussed a lot about mid late '90s, that'll fit very well with our discussion of today. Because today I would like to more discuss the adventure theme as a whole, which I know for a fact that you have quite a lot to say about it. As I would say, it's probably arguably like your second favorite Lego theme.
It's arguably my first favorite theme, arguably my second, maybe no worse than third. It never places lower than third. It sort of depends a little bit on the mood.
And that's fair because I always kind of pinned you down as more castles number one and then adventures is number two.
If you held a gun to my head, it would pretty consistently be Castle 1, Adventurers 2, and Star Wars maybe sometimes would round out the top three.
Okay, okay. But for the viewers out there, adventures as a theme could basically be pretty much summed up as you have Indiana Jones mixed with what is it like Crocodile Dundee?
Mostly Indiana Jones, but yeah, there are some other elements mixed in there.
Well, he is Australian, which I'm pretty sure is inspired by Crocodile Dundee.
Definitely takes some inspiration from that. Although I would dispute whether or not Johnny Thunder is Australian because, to go back to my source of information, it's not mentioned in the Canadian Lego Mania magazines.
It wasn't at first. However, what I've discovered was like for stuff online, like there was like some sort of like flash game, I think, that was online. I'm not sure if it was during the Orient Expedition arc, but I think Orient Expedition may have retconned him to be Australian because in one of the magazines from 2003, he's shown talking with an Australian accent, as well as that game that has some voice lines. He has an Australian accent, so I don't know if that was just a retcon that Lego did when they came out with Orient Expedition.
It's possible that they had different things in different parts of the world because it does seem like some of the stuff that Orient Expedition made universal, such as Dr. Kilroy, were previously used before Orient Expedition, but it wasn't at the very least, it wasn't in the Canadian editions, and I think we tracked pretty well with the American editions. And as a result, I look somewhat suspiciously on anything that comes strictly out of Orient Expedition, where it contradicts my true love, the original three.
I think a good example that would be Pippin Reed, because she had a very distinctive name different from Gale Storm and became a very much a unique character.
We certainly treated her as quite different from Gale Storm, even though it's pretty clear that Lego intends them to be the same person. It's
If I'm correct, Pippin Reed as a name was used in like European stuff, like even on Bricklink, the listing for the minifigs show Gale as Pippin Reed, and I think uh like other websites that have information about Lego basically shown that like Pippin Reed, Doctor Kilroy, Orient Expedition basically just yeah, as you said, made them universal.
Yeah. So for anyone listening, we are going to stick with the true names of the Canadian original versions. And when we use the Orient Expedition names, it's going to be clear from context. We're talking about the Orient Expedition.
Yes, the sub theme that came out in 2003. So obviously, Adventures was released in I believe 98 or 97.
98, and then there was a theme in 99 and a theme in 2000. And those are the original three. And then we had a gap. And 3 years later, it got rebooted as Orient Expedition, which had its own three mini themes.
Which I'll definitely be excited to talk about that because that's definitely more where I have more stuff too. But in the first wave in '98, they had a whole Egyptian theme, which on its own, is arguably the best year for adventures. I don't know if you would die on that hill.
If I could pick one wave of set releases from Lego's entire catalog, the 98 release of Adventurers sets is probably the closest to utter perfection in my mind. There isn't a bad set in the bunch. Some of the non-standard ones, because there are more sets than the ones that just appear in like your mainstream catalogs.
Like the smaller promotional like poly bags or
Yeah, the promotional poly bags, and then there's a couple that are like medium sized, but they're not.
Toys R Us exclusive one that was kind of smaller.
Yeah, Toys R Us exclusives and stuff like that. But even those, while they're unnecessary, there isn't a bad set in the line. And the tan bricks that there were tan base plates before, but there weren't tan bricks really. Not outside of like Legoland California and stuff like that. And the new fig designs and the Egyptian printed pieces and the 1920s/30s styled vehicles. I mean, there's nothing about them that isn't perfect. And I will, if you're going to send me to a desert island and let me pack one set, my only question is going to be, do I take Pharaoh's Forbidden Ruins or do I take Sphinx Secret Surprise?
See, that is the hardest question for that because, in my opinion, as much as Pharaoh's Forbidden Ruin just has more, the what you get per buck, I almost feel like the Sphinx is slightly better because you only get a little less minifigs, but you still get an amazing like Egyptian ruin like architecture. You still get a pharaoh, you still get a coffin, you get a tent, you still get vehicles, you get the good guys, the bad guys, and like I said, it's cheaper than Pharaoh's Forbidden Ruins, but you still get essentially all you need. You just get a little less.
Yeah, and for myself, I'm not an entirely disinterested party because I have both of them. But I got the Sphinx Secret Surprise first. That was the very first adventurer set in our family. I bought it in March of 1998. The lost T.O.A and I had got the Lego Mania magazine in January and February, which was all about the adventurers, and we were now all about the adventurers.
Really started on a high note.
It was a beautiful set. It's still a beautiful set, and there's elements to it like the white pharaoh's headdress, the pure black coffin, the tent, as you mentioned, that don't appear in any other adventurer set. And then on top of that, you've got your standard mummy inside the Sphinx. You've got the raised base plate, which is unique.
Nice mummy design.
Yeah, all of the minifigs in this theme are fantastic. Even like Gale and Johnny, who are boring when you have like 10 of them, but they're still really well designed figs. And as I said at the time, tan was brand new, so those two torsos were sharp.
Well, on that, just a quick side note with that. I mean, Johnny is so good that they didn't change his tan torso through the whole run he had. Like Gale, they changed it when they made Pippin Reed in Orient Expedition, and she had like a tan and a green variation. But Johnny, that tan torso was used in the three original years as well as Orient Expedition. That's how, and they basically recreated that same core torso design for him in the Lego movie. Like that just shows how solid of design that was.
Yeah, the late '90s is for from the way I look at it, the peak of Lego Fig design, because it's getting more detailed than some of the stuff that had come earlier, but it's not too detailed the way that, especially like superheroes and collectible minifigs, sometimes they just get a little bit too crazy these days, and they lose that quintessential element of Lego-ness. But in the late 90s, like you've got the ninja theme, you've got the Fright Night torsos, you've got obviously the adventurers I'm all over,
Aquazone and Space were top notch.
Roboforce, UFOs, insectoids, the first wave or two of Star Wars designs. They're all really good, but also still very Lego-ish.
And interestingly enough, that was also roughly when Lego started having leg print. Not very often, but the Pharaoh being one of the first, like after the Roboforce, then I think the Insectoids and as along with the Mummy were the first leg print, which definitely for the Mummy, the Pharaoh fig helps a lot to give it the Egyptian attire.
It was definitely money well spent. And notably, the first minifig that we can say for sure has toes.
That is true. That is very true. I remember that always being just really weird. But so also the adventures, coming in '98, it looked like Lego had spent a substantial amount of money like to create all the new prints, the new headgears like the Johnny's hat, the Baron's like helmet, all the prints, like all these the mummy's headdress. Like also it looked like it was a high budget theme. And like also like it worked like because it became extremely popular like not just in our family but in the larger Lego community. Johnny's like heralded as like one of the best things Lego's ever done, so much so that he even had cameos in the Lego movie, not noticeable but easy enough, which does make me kind of wonder from your perspective, what do you think it was about that original Adventures year that made it so good?
Well, you have to start with the design, the set design and the fig design, and but also not just the design of the sets themselves by themselves, but also look at them a little bit in a vacuum. If you take a look at like where town was in '98, it was juniorizing. The figs were okay, but they were nothing new that hadn't been around for 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I was going to say the fig designs had been the same for like the last five or so almost, I think, at that point.
Yeah, they were basically unchanged, but the vehicles were becoming blockier. Things were becoming more juniorized. If you take a look at Castle, the grand days of the Black Knights and the Lions were long past, and you're looking at Fright Knights, which I'm fond of, but let's not kid ourselves. They're not what the Castle theme had been from a set design standpoint.
Objectively speaking, they are like one of the worst castle themes for designs, if not the worst for set designs.
At least as of 1998. Pirates were in the rearview mirror, and the last wave of pirates that with the Armada mixed in, some of those designs were weaker. So Lego was not in a great spot for set designs, and then they slam it out of the park with a like bases loaded home run with the adventurers. But there's also what is in the sets themselves. In most sets, you have three distinct factions. You've got the good guy adventurers, you've got the bad guy adventurers, and you've got the supernatural undead mummy faction. That much diversity and like setup for play is sort of novel at this point. Usually you had either like Aquazone and Pirates or Space, it was just good and bad, or it was Town where it's like all just sort of the same. But here you've got three definite factions who can be in conflict with each other, and then the setting too. You've got this element of mystery and adventure and the some really fun vehicle designs. Granted, a car isn't going to be swooshable, but whatever a car is, those cars are that.
I believe the term would be roomable.
I'll take that.
I think another like a lot that does help with Adventures was that it's not like anything Lego had produced before. Because when you have like first off, it's ancient, like just the Egyptian aspect about it. Like you take away the Adventures, the Barons group, and all that, you still get all this like ancient Egypt architecture and the mummy figs, which at that point Lego, the farthest in the past Lego had really done it was just medieval ages. They hadn't done anything like older than that. Even with like their town vehicles, they haven't done anything quite from that time era. Well, I guess in the very early days, the when Lego started making Lego, their cars probably would have been closer to that time era. But like it was just even like nowadays, like Lego doesn't really make ancient history sort of like related builds unless it's like something like this, like with Pharaoh's Quest or even like Scooby Doo, which even had a mummy set. Like typically, it's very limited. And as you were mentioning, Tan was like not common before. And then I believe this is also roughly the same time that Lego started having like more named characters and actual like characters who actually had like minifigures who had character, not just names.
Yeah, it definitely represents a step forward. Like if you look at the divers theme of the year before, it's almost a similar concept. You've got exploration and cool vehicles and set locations, although in that case they're underwater ruins. But your divers, although some of them had names in the magazines and stuff, they're basically generic town figs that are all sort of similar. With the adventurers, you've got distinct characters. Even if they hadn't given us the names of Johnny Thunder and Harry Kane and Gale Storm and all the rest, you would still have the adventurer, the pilot, the girl, the old guy, and they're very clearly distinct, and that is very much a development from what had been before. You could look at like Ninjago today and say that, well, Ninjago owes that storytelling minifig style to the adventurers. That's kind of where it really took off and launched. There are some things before that you can kind of say, oh no, it's the time cruisers that were first, but the adventurers were sort of the blockbuster that made it really happen.
Yeah, time cruisers were more a novelty, while adventurers was more a turning point, I'd say.
There's definitely a difference between the two of them. Certainly, there always was in our treatment of them.
Yes, I definitely do think though that adventures it helped a lot that they released adventures when they did, because if they had done it 1 year later, well, with the next wave like of adventures with the jungle stuff, you could already tell that they were beginning to juniorize it like a little bit in the builds, not very noticeable, but the hints were there, especially I believe in like Achu's temple, where it actually doesn't have like that many parts to build it. And like at that point, the palm trees were just one piece. Like if Adventures had come out like a year or two later, they wouldn't. I don't like would it have. I wonder if it would have done as well because of the fact that Lego was just making things simpler to build.
Well, the timing definitely did help, but also the subject matter makes a difference too. Adventurers is set in the desert with Egyptian stuff. Egyptian architecture is very geometric. Obviously, we think of the pyramids, which are pyramids, but like pillars and but their ruins are a little more substantial. Whereas like when you get into the Amazonian ruins, the which I guess are probably mostly based on like Mayan stuff in Mexico. It's not. It's a little bit more ruined, so to speak. And they didn't do they could have gone with the temple there just as they, or sorry, with the pyramid there, just like they could have in the desert theme, but they didn't with either. And it becomes a little bit more of a collapsed ruin. And I think it was just a little bit more of a challenging subject matter, but it is being juniorized a little bit more as well. And then you'd see that really happen with the dinosaur theme.
Yes, that I mean, I'll give it this. I'm really glad that they gave us some really nice dinosaur designs because I do prefer the older early 2000s dinosaur builds to like the more modern ones because there's the Lego charm. But yeah, that wave, the 2000 wave with the Dino Island really didn't its builds is where it really falls short.
Yeah, there's a lot more. I think the biggest telling point of that juniorization at the end of the 90s and the early 2000s is Lego's willingness to use things like an 8 by 8 brick. Not an 8 by 8 plate, but an 8 by 8 brick. And they would use bricks like that when in other themes before, after, and in Star Wars, they would use a plate. And that just seems to like symbolize the whole difference in style.
Yeah, like some of the sets really aren't like it's not bad. Like it was still done with like a level of skill to design the sets compared to like also like what Jack Stone or Town was doing because I had the Dino Trapper some I can't remember what the set's called, but it had like basically just a bunch of bad guys in a set with like a trapping vehicle and yeah, it's juniorized, but like even then like the design isn't bad, but compared to the previous 2 years, yeah, you could definitely tell that it was not as good.
And it also wasn't quite as grounded in reality. Now, obviously, part of that is going to be the subject matter. Dinosaurs aren't real. Mayan ruins and Egyptian ruins are real.
I mean,
Um,
they're stretching a little bit by having Achu and the mummy there, but that's like very, you know, bit of a stretch. Not it's less of a stretch to have some dude hanging out in the jungle than there is to have an island full of dinosaurs. And I also feel like the vehicles in the dinosaur island were also a little less realistic.
Yes, and that's sort of what I'm talking about because they're built to capture dinosaurs and to work in an environment that we don't have quite as much of a strict historical basis for. They, like the tail on the net launcher on the back of the Baron's car. That what real vehicle is that being based off of? So even if it's the same level of degree of difficulty to build it, it doesn't come across as sophisticated because it is more of a cartoonish idea.
Yeah. I mean, that also I think just is also interesting because that's also when they decided to add a kid into the mix of characters with Mike.
Ah, yes. Although we might want to talk about characters in general before we talk about how Mike changed everything.
Yeah, yeah, he really did change a lot of stuff. I mean, in fairness, he did make things a whole lot more interesting for our games.
We definitely had a lot of fun with Mike to the point where my brother and I, or well, your brother and I, got so sick of Mike because we'd overdosed on the amount of Mike that we had enjoyed in our Lego games.
Yeah, see, I never got quite into using. See, I mean, with Mike, I guess I can't really say because like the whole adventure theme, didn't enjoy as much as you older siblings did. Mostly because you all had your sure, all the characters have pre-established characters, but we all had our versions of it. And by the time it trickled down to me, I was just copycatting a copycat of a copycat, essentially. And I didn't even get Johnny Thunder for a while. I had like Harry Kane, Mike, several of the bad guys before I got a Johnny. So for me, adventure, I didn't get to have as much established adventure characters. And so when I got Mike, he was like the most copycat of a copycat. So he had nothing unique going for him in my time.
Yeah, so the of the characters in the original year, you had on the good guy side Johnny Thunder, Harry Kane, Doctor Lightning, not Kilroy, and Gale Storm, and all four of them would continue through to the Jungle Wave, and the trio gets definitively narrowed down after that because Harry Kane doesn't reappear. Gale, Dr. Lightning, and Johnny are joined by Mike for the dinosaurs, and perhaps because they're the core three from the beginning that continued through all three, they're the three renamed that will appear in the Orient Expedition.
Essentially, Harry Kane and Mike fill the same slot of the other one. And then in Orient Expedition, basically each biome of like Asia, essentially, for the different kind of like with the Himalayas, the China, like all that, like they each had basically a side character that with them with Sherpa, Jin Lee, and
Bablu?
Bablu, I think. Yeah. Basically they took the places of the driver. Poor Harry Kane. He got gypped.
Yeah, because we were so based in the 98 magazine. I think at the very least I anyway still think of the adventures as Johnny, Harry, Dr. Lightning, and Gale, probably in that order. And I still think of Mike as sort of an interloper who gets added on. A feeling of Mike that got put onto my Johnny. Johnny doesn't care that much for Mike having been tacked on to his little gang of adventurers.
Well, yeah, well, he very much was. He just showed up for 1 year and then was gone the next. And you could very much just tell he kind of felt like the scrappy duo of the bunch, the younger kid who was added there to make it more relatable to kids.
Unfortunately for my Johnny, however, Mike has never actually left after a year. It's been 21 years, and that darn kid is still following him around.
Somehow still a kid too. See, I mean, with Mike as a character, we can pretty much thank the Jurassic Park movies because at that point the first two had been released. Like the third movie hadn't come out yet, but every Jurassic Park movie always has a kid in it. Which and the Adventures Dino theme is very much, I would say, influenced by the second Jurassic Park movie, The Lost World. So you have people capturing animals. You have a kid. Like, yeah, obviously he's there because of dinosaurs. You have to have a kid scared of dinosaurs or super fascinated in dinosaurs, one or the other.
It definitely marks a difference for Lego. I'm pretty sure that other than Anakin Skywalker, who had only come out the year before, Mike might be the first explicit kid that Lego had released. You could argue that Tim in the time theme is supposed to be young, maybe a teenager, maybe a kid.
Well, he's got freckles and he's kind of like a Marty McFly, so he's also supposed to look like that teenage sidekick to the professor sort of thing.
But teenage sidekick is sort of a gray area. Is it a kid? Isn't it a kid? Mike was much more clear cut. He's got a slingshot tucked into the print on his belt, and the official description of him is very much, this is a kid. You should be imagining someone who's like 10 or 12 years old.
Yeah. Interesting enough, this isn't adventures related, but with the kid thing you're mentioning, I did come across one Paradisa set, just perusing, and there's one Paradisa set that's basically a playground. We have like someone is in a sandbox and two people in a seesaw, and I was like looking to Eck, and I was asking him like, so are these the first Lego kids Lego has came out with? Because that's a playground with people playing at it. Those are not adults.
Hey, adults can do things at the playground too. Like,
Nothing says that they're not, but it's like none of them had like you look at them and you're like, I'm pretty sure those are supposed to be kids, which is just kind of weird to think about because before Lego had shorter legs, essentially kids were marked by freckles on the face.
it was harder to distinguish them, and I've actually retrofitted my mic at this point with a pair of short legs, and it does work. It makes a little more sense.
It looks really good on them. I've seen it. And then I'll say after the Dino Island year, which did have the Baron return as the villain because he actually had skipped out on the 99 year and got replaced by Senior Palomar. And then he came back a third time when in 2003, Lego essentially rebooted Adventures because let's be honest, it's not a continuation. Well, the other three you could say were. This was very much a reboot where everybody got new face prints. Well, except Dr. Lightning. You got extra torso prints for Johnny, new prints for essentially the other characters, and Peel got reworked. Like Gale officially became Pippin Reed, Dr. Lightning became Dr. Kilroy, and the Baron became Lord Sinister, which is interesting because there was Sam Sinister, there's Baron von Braun, and they got mixed into one character.
Although the Baron is clearly the dominant source of genes in that character.
The Baron just took Sam Sinister's hat.
Maybe his black coat too.
Pretty much. So.
And then left him for dead somewhere.
Yeah, like even when it came out, like I was pretty young when it came out, but even and then I could kind of tell that this was a return to Adventures, and like it was marketed as a return of Johnny Thunder, and also was kind of like a soft reboot. Although,
yeah, it wasn't the same in the same way that the first 3 years had been the same.
Well, the first three had nothing that they all the same like face prints on the characters, so the most part like, and they were all using more or less the same prints and such. So it was like, okay, these could all be just a continuation. But our expedition not only was a few years later with new prints, but also had its own essentially three, not quite three waves, but three sections because the Himalayas and the what was like the jungle,
the Himalayas and the Indian portion.
Yeah, the Indian portion, like those two came out first, and then the China part came out I think later that year because the first catalog I had with it that was a bit later. So again, you kind of have basically three sections, which was a very grand. That was a very grand like sub theme because like there's a lot of large sets. There's a lot of different stuff. There's stuff to collect. There was a board game aspect included with the games, and like there's a lot of like extra side characters.
Yeah, the amount of lore that they stuffed in Orient Expedition really shatters everything else that Lego had done in a theme up to that point, unless maybe you want to talk about like Alpha Team, which had a full-blown video game.
Well, and Bionicle, but that's a given.
Well, we're setting Bionicle aside, but just looking at the Fig themes, Orient Expedition comes a lot closer to stuff that came after it, like all of the Knights Kingdom stuff, or Ninjago or Chima, but
The collectathon of it, like having these gold items to go hunting for, very, very much a staple of Lego these days.
Yeah, it was sort of it's almost by using the earlier characters and sort of the ideas of the earlier themes, but repackaging them in a way that's more familiar now. It's sort of a transitional point, and if you look at when it occurred, it's right on the it was like the last year of Old Gray. And I think the theme didn't do as well as it could have. I certainly remember a lot more of those sets on discount than but that's partly the time frame. It was during a run of years when if it wasn't Star Wars or Bionicle, Lego wasn't doing so hot.
Well, it also had to compete with Star Wars. So episode 2 had only like just come out. So you had all that stuff and the Star Wars Lego was getting better. Bionicle was in its heyday in 2003. So for what it's but it probably just came down to that the people who grew like the younger kids just weren't as interested in adventures as the kids in the 90s were.
And it's also arguable too that the sets, although I would say the Orient Expedition sets are generally quite good, they're not as good top to bottom. So like the big sets can go pretty much toe to toe, I think, with a lot of other big sets. And some of the medium sets are the real knockouts, like the dragon ship in the China sub theme or the balloon. But the really small ones, like the Junchi and the Tigara, the Yeti, that size and smaller, so the introductory sets to get kids on board, those ones aren't quite as good as the earlier adventurer ones had been.
Well, those sets very much you could tell where the budget went to. The large creatures.
Which now that we have like the giant trolls and that sort of style that was introduced with the Castle 2007 stuff, these big figures are real primitive.
They have a charm, but they have a lot of flaws. A lot of flaws, I can definitely say. I mean, don't get me wrong, I have a really soft spot for those because I had the Junchi and the Tigira set, and I basically didn't have much of the older adventures. Like Orient Expedition is when I kind of got my first real Johnny. Because my first Johnny I got was from a studio set, a Jurassic Park 3 set, which is a whole another topic.
Yeah, there are some interesting survivals of Johnny Thunder outside of the adventurers, and I think we've seen a lot of him in the last like 5 years or so, about since the Lego movie, because everyone who was the right age to buy adventurers or be into them during their first run is now my age, which is to say, old enough to have disposable income.
Yes, very true. Very true.
So we will go after that collectible minifig Johnny Thunder. Or if you throw a Johnny Thunder into a Lego movie set, oh, I wasn't going to buy any of these random Lego movie sets, but that one is Johnny Thunder, so I'll reconsider.
Yes, yes. See, I was thinking about this topic beforehand, and thinking about what the best adventure theme, like sub theme, was. Because also, like Dino Island, I would say is on the bottom. One could argue it's better than the Amazon just because you got all the dinosaurs. Like, but for sets, it was also like weaker for set designs. But it came down to like Orient Expedition and the first 89 like desert theme because the desert theme I'd say is more consistent and introduced it and is the OG. But the Orient Expedition had so much more variety of locations. You had all these other side characters, and similar to the desert theme with like Achu. Like actually, there's a pretty much a recurring theme for all adventures where you have the Baron for the bad guys, you have the adventures for the good guys, but then you kind of have these neutral parties, which in the Expedition, all there's less neutral parties are more like people locals who take sides because like in the Himalayas you have Ninkampa who is very much sided with the Baron and you have Sherpa sided with the adventurers, but you have all these extra side characters, you have all these different items to look for and you have like these smaller like treasure like because with like the Junchi and the Tiger and the Yeti set you have gems there like there's so much in the Orient Expedition theme that like I'm actually wondering if a lot of people would consider that the best adventure wave or not.
Well, it's almost cheating because it's like three themes crammed into one. Um, and so if you say nope, it counts as a theme, well then it has the benefit of having three themes crammed into one, and it has the benefit of sort of having figured things out a little bit by looking at the earlier themes. My vote would still go to the original one, and actually, I might go and say that I dislike Orient Expedition, but I have a weird reason for that. So we've made the connection that Johnny kind of equals Indiana Jones. That's always seemed pretty clear to me. Well, Indiana Jones had 3 original movies and then a much later sequel. Now, the 3 original movies, there is Johnny versus the Nazis, Johnny doing something else. Or sorry, Indy versus the Nazis, Indy doing something
This
else.
is how synonymous the characters are in our minds.
And then the third one is Indy against his original opponent again. If you look at the adventurer themes, it's Johnny versus the Baron,
Someone else.
Johnny versus someone else, and then Johnny versus the Baron again. Now, I'm not going to argue that Dino Island is the Last Crusade, because
No.
Dino Island isn't the Last
I would argue
Crusade.
that Dino Island's quality matches more Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
What and it's also the odd man out in the same way that Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is.
It just unfortunately came before Orient Expedition did.
So I guess if you twist it around that way, you could say that the original one is Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Orient Expedition, which sort of redoes what it did and does it in a bigger and more expansive way. Orient Expedition is The Last Crusade. And you're going to have the same argument or debate that Indiana Jones fans have, which is the best movie Raiders or Last Crusade?
See, I may love Orient Expedition, and I personally like it the most, but I'm not willing to die on it. Just because I will admit that I think the desert theme had probably the best stats per set. Like if you were to basically give every set basically a rating, how good it is for like what you get, what the price and all that, I feel like it would be more consistently higher numbers than Orient Expedition, because unfortunately Orient Expedition does have some lower sets where, as you were mentioning, have some problems. Or if you decide to break up Orient Expedition into 3 different sub themes, I don't think any of those sub themes would beat out the desert theme.
Yeah, none of them by themselves. They need all 3 of them together to have the richness to really compete for the top spot. But it's not a bad competition to get second place in. Like, you're talking about 2 heavyweights that are both really deserving of the title, and they're just unfortunately stuck in the same bracket.
The thing is, like, I've never learned what the other Lego community thinks of this. I just know people like Johnny, but I don't know how they view Orient Expedition. But like I said, I love it, and I am happy to see that at least Johnny as a character got a reference in the Lego movie. He's basically had a revamp in collectible minifig, and even the Baron got the whole haunted mansion theme like ride.
Oh, that is a fantastic Easter egg set. And if I had, a random $200 to just drop on it, I would do it in a heartbeat, because it's such a loving tribute to the Baron and back to that element of adventurousness. There's so many beautiful little things in it.
Yes, yes. Now, I kind of like one other just side question tangent before we're ending up here pretty soon. Um, Obviously, Indiana Jones, Johnny Thunder, very synonymous. Did you see the Indiana Jones movies before you got Adventures, or getting the Adventures made you kind of want to watch them?
So I know that I didn't see Indiana Jones for a few years after this. So we got our first Adventures, as I said, in '98.
Yeah.
I did not see Indiana Jones until after I had seen Star Wars.
Okay.
I didn't see Star Wars until the autumn of '99. So I definitely didn't see Indiana Jones until at the earliest, the tail end of '99, and I'm going to guess probably in 2000.
Oh, okay.
Which means that by the time that I saw Indiana Jones, I had 2 years as a kid of Johnny Thunder under my belt.
That might be one reason why they're harder to distinguish in your mind.
It's definitely possible, but there's also an element where Johnny for me is not entirely an indie character. He definitely took some stuff in. It's sort of one of those things where we saw the movies and it made stuff make sense, but it was after the fact.
Do you think Johnny might have also been slightly influenced by DuckTales, just a tiny bit?
There is a very good argument to be made that DuckTales probably provided some of the understanding of adventurers going out and finding treasure.
Because I feel like that might also have influenced Mike turning into Johnny's nephew and great nephews and all this, and the family hierarchy of like Donald, the triplets and like Uncle Scrooge seems kind of similar to like Dr. Lightning, Johnny, and Mike. Which yes, in our under a universe we had Mike as Johnny's nephew, which I always thought was the Lego company's. I had no idea that was your own thing that you came up with.
Yeah, this is something that our host here was utterly shocked to learn was that, oh no, that's not in the catalogs or anything. That's just something that we made up.
When I learned that fact, I had like a just like my mind was blown because I just never questioned the fact of my older siblings telling me that Mike was his nephew. I didn't question it. You guys never lied to me before.
It wasn't a lie. We filled in a gap. Why is this
We did.
random kid with no last name hanging out with these, as far as we know, unmarried adults? Although the question of whether or not they're unmarried is something that we went back and forth on quite a bit as kids.
I could imagine. But we're past the 40-minute mark, and that's it's going to make this a longer podcast edits. And I feel like we've covered most of the bases. I mean, we kind of skimmed over the Amazon year, but to be honest, it was kind of the most forgettable year. So we, I feel like we've gone most of the ground. So I'm going to kind of cut it short here. If you have any kind of other quick final thoughts about adventures, speak now, forever hold your tongue.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts about adventures, but I guess if there was anything like really important that I would say we haven't touched on, might just sort of be how Lego has tried to capture that in a bottle again. Obviously, Pharaoh's Quest is sort of the obvious. Oh, that's looking back at adventurers.
And then Monster Hunters.
Monster Hunters is sort of similar. Atlantis actually is kind of in that same vein of explorers going into a more fantastic world. And I'd say a lot of what has made Ninjago successful is a further mutation of that sort of general idea of the fusion of normal and the setting.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I don't think I have any real final thoughts. I kind of got most what I had to say. I have a little less of a deep rooted love for the theme. I still love it, but mine's a little less integral to my childhood. I have other themes that have filled up that void. Anyone who want to hazard a guess, your first guess doesn't count because it's Bionicle. That very much I think filled that level of love. That like the love you have for adventures, I would say is pretty comparable to or above even the love I have for Bionicle.
Yeah, we've said amongst the brothers before that the protagonist of my Lego universe is Johnny Thunder, and that's not an exaggeration. That's pretty much literally true.
If people are actually curious to know about your Johnny, tell us where can they actually find that?
So my recommendation, the most public way to learn anything about my Johnny, would be to go to http colon backslash android files dot thecomicseries.com. So all of us brothers who are still active in Lego have at some point or another become Lego comic makers. We take pictures of Lego and we frame stories around that, and we make web comics out of Lego. My main one isn't just about Johnny, but Johnny has sort of become very
He's
important.
hijacking it.
He is assuming his rightful spot as the protagonist.
I'm not going to go too much into the comics just because I actually do want to have that for another discussion with you and have like Ek or Zakta involved in that one as well. Like have a larger podcast, like possibly with all four of us. Don't know how I'm going to do that yet. I might figure something out just because of the programs we're using. But yes, you can check that out. It's a really good way of figuring out like how a lot of our Lego universes work because we're all more or less based on yours by some degree.
I am the straight man, and you have all deviated in strange directions from me.
So I will try and have a link in the description for that. If I remember, I might forget when I'm editing this, as well as you also have your own podcast that I'm going to. I've linked it before, and I'll link it again for those listening. That is, what was it called again?
So it's Lego Mania Memories. And we look at, as we said, the Lego Mania magazine.
Yes, and that I believe on Spotify.
It's hosted on Anchor, which is a subsidiary of Spotify. But basically, if you search for Lego Mania Memories on any major podcast distributor, you'll find it there.
Okay. So yeah, this has actually been pretty fun. It's very different not having someone else in the exact room as me.
Yeah, you didn't start by saying whether I'm sitting to your right or your left. I'm very confused.
Well, technically, from where I am, you're sitting to my right because my right is facing south. So you're kind of right in front to my right.
I'm kind of behind you, maybe.
Yes, you're that direction, really far away.
All right.
But yeah, no, it's been a pleasure to have you here, How One. I hope the dozen people who watch the podcast have enjoyed this. It's a longer one, so until next time, hopefully we'll have you on the podcast. This has been the T.O.A podcast. I am your host Onvermel, and we are retiring from the night.